Well, losing someone that you love, especially a child, I'm fighting back tears even thinking about it. The worst thing that you can think about happening in your life, and maybe you have actually walked through this. My next author is Patricia Elliot, and she has written a book of hope and coming through some of the darkest moments that anybody can think about. She wrote the book called The Weight of Emptiness, Comfort and Hope for the Loss of a Loved One. Welcome, Patricia.
Welcome. Thank you for having me on.
I imagine that you wish this was a book you didn't have to write.
Yes, I do. And I think that because I've always loved anything to do with mental health, I've written before I suffered this loss about the stages of grief. And once you actually suffer something like this, they're totally different from the academic kind of viewpoint.
Very interesting. Would you mind taking us through just a little bit of your backstory?
Yes, I was adopted. So, and I almost found as if I didn't belong somewhere. So I used my imagination, and I'm highly creative. I've got my mind so full of things. And that's how I resonated with my oldest son. He also was that. But I found that I could compartmentalize some of these things and he couldn't. And I decided that I had to do, I was a musician. Well, I thought I'd change the world through my music, but that wasn't to be. I hurt my wrist, but anyway, that's a longer story. So I decided to do law.
Okay.
And completely changed. But I
Yeah.
thought through law I would change the world, but actually it's a cutthroat business, and I wasn't corporate law. I was at the lower end of the scale. So I was with the poor law, the just where people, relationship law, divorces, abused people. And I thought I'd rather deal with people. So I changed tack and became a psychologist. So I started my business, MindCircles. And that's now about 20 years ago. And actually, my oldest son helped me with that. So I thought through that, we'd just help everybody be more positive, no matter what trauma they suffered. But in Scotland here, we're kind of tough. It's a bit like we love stress. No, we are fine, and we don't want to talk
Right.
about it.
Don't talk about my emotions. Right.
So that I thought that it would take off. I was dealing with organizations, but they didn't really want to pay for things to help their staff. And some of them even said their staff didn't need help. That wasn't the story you got from staff. But so I then decided MindCircles was going to be for the individuals. And my son actually helped me with my techniques. I have very simple techniques. I call it my ABC, the friend on your shoulder, because I think we don't all need a counselor necessarily, but we all need something. And this is like just a go-to, and they're very simple, but what's hard is to make them a habit. It's like anything, we can pick bad habits, but to have a good habit really takes, just a lot of
Discipline and thought, like you said. Let's go ahead and share about the loss of your son as we move through this, because I think that that's really so foundational.
Well, he was an actor, a photographer, again, a highly creative person, but he was also sensitive. He wasn't your big macho boy, and he was my oldest. But in fact, people thought he was my youngest. He always had that child in him. And I was working in London, and he was never diagnosed with anything. But we talked about it because he did leave home quite early to try and forge a life in Hollywood, doing acting and things. And he was fairly successful. Came back to London. And I remember I was in London. He'd come back to Glasgow and he phoned me. And it was so funny because he was one of these people who was really excitable and then calm and high and low. So I think probably he might have even been diagnosed with bipolar if we had done it. Just to let people know, but he hadn't had a diagnosis. And I remember him phoning me and he said, Mum, everything's going to be all right. And it was like very matter of fact, which kind of wasn't like him. And I said, oh, I'll be back on Friday. I'll see you on Friday. And on Friday, I got home and I couldn't get him on his mobile phone. He lived up near the Glasgow Art School. So I thought, I'll go up, and I saw a light on, couldn't get in, but that wasn't unusual. I'd be listening to music or something. But you know, in the pit of your stomach, you think there's something not right.
Yeah.
And I went to my neighbour, he works on the oil rigs, Chris, a lovely guy. And I went to him and I said, you know, I'd like you to come with me, because I think I'll need to get into my son's flat. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, break the door down.
Right.
We went up, it was a gated community. And so he climbed the gate and opened it from the inside. And I came in and we went up. He was on the top floor overlooking Glasgow, beautiful. And the door was open. And he said, no, you're not coming in. And he went in and he came back out and he said, I'm going to get emotional, do my own techniques of the ABC. But he said, he's gone, Pat.
Oh.
And he said, but he looked peaceful. I mean, really, you know, now he'd actually hanged himself. But obviously we called the police and things, you know, and I think from there, anyone who's gone through this, you go through guilt. What if? Could I have done something? Could I, you know? And I've had lots of people say that. But I'm a very stubborn person. My adopted father, called me a bloody minded gene. And I think if somebody says to me, you can't do something, I will.
You're going to do it. Patricia,
So,
let's talk about the stages of grief that you went through after discovering this and having to begin to find a new normal.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that when I wrote about it before this had happened, you go through the academic stages. There's anger, there's guilt, there's anger, there's crying.
Denial, is that one of them?
Yes. There's kind of 5 stages. Now, that just doesn't happen. It didn't happen to me. You could have all of these stages in an hour, you know, or a minute, and things will trigger you. I don't think you don't ever get over a loss like this or over grief. But one of the things that I hoped through my book was sharing other people's stories as well, because that's what motivated me to write this. When this happened to him, I made it quite public on social media. It happened. And his siblings, I've got 3 other children, another son and 2 daughters, and they were kind of angry. They said, why are you telling people? And I said, because it has to be open. You know, and from that, I found that lots of people, I think, the sharing, I said, do you want to have your stories in my book? And that's where the strapline, the sharing is caring and helps healing, you know.
Absolutely. When you see people, like, boy, Patricia, you hit it so on the head when you said that the academic is so different than actually experiencing it. Would you say that these are stories of hope?
Yes. I mean, I gave a talk actually in Australia, and when I was over there, there's a journalist, I think it's Lee Sales, and what I liked about her book, she speaks to people who've been through trauma, lots of different trauma. And one of the things I agreed with her, I don't like the word survivor. I don't like the word victim. I like that we endure in a different way. And I think if people endure life and see they're honoring their loved one, I mean, no one's loved one would want them to be miserable
of course.
You know. Now, I think that's where I did go to counselling. I thought, right, it's worth, you know, there was a friend whose actually son had been murdered, which was, to me, was worse. And she said, no, everybody's grief is the same. Everybody's loss. You know, we go through it in a different way. And she was rushing off. I said, where to? She had a meeting, a counselling, a kind of grief group. And I said, oh, can I come along? I only went once. I thought I couldn't go through this. People were distraught, and some people had lost a child 20 years ago. And I thought, you know, I have to write something that gives people hope and comfort, because there is. And I believe I'm honouring Bruce by that, you know, writing that. I can feel him on my shoulder, you know. In fact, I'm wearing his ashes. This is the Ashes into Glass. A couple of young guys set up a business, and it's beautiful. And I've got a ring and earrings and things. And it's interesting that I think you don't want, life goes on. life goes on. And when people say to me, oh, if only you'd stopped him, and that's where I'm coming back to the stubborn gene, he would have found another way. You cannot prevent suicide. I'd love to be able to stop someone, but seriously, if they really are considering it, I think that they will do it. He would have been angry because I was fortunate that he left me a letter. He left me a letter and a letter to his siblings, and just saying I feel trapped in another character. And he wouldn't have liked the pandemic. He wouldn't have liked it. He was very sensitive to what was going on in the world.
Sure.
And that was destroying him, I think,
Patricia, I think the message that you have to share, especially with parents that have lost a child, is perhaps one of the most important messages we can share. I can't imagine what a joy, what an honor for you, I imagine, to be in that space where you can speak to the rawest emotion.
Yeah.
Is there any final thoughts as we wrap up this interview?
Well, I know there's a lot of talk on suicide and everybody's saying, oh, we must talk, we must talk. Now, my son was a talker, but he wouldn't talk about his feelings. It's a different thing. I think it's very, very difficult. And no loss is the same. They're all different.
Right.
And things will trigger you. You could be in a supermarket and a piece of music or a favorite biscuit or something,
Sure.
and it comes up. But you can endure life in a different way. You can do it. And I think there's too many of this. I can't. Turn that into I can.
I love that. Patricia, I'm so glad that you joined us. We want to thank Prime 7 Media for making this possible. And where is your book available?
My book's available on Amazon. I know because it's a big book. In fact, I think there's two versions. One's a kind of A5, but there is a big one, and it is $17.96. But it's available on my website if people wanted, say, a signed copy. And what I was going to do, I was going to speak to my IT guy, maybe get a code or something. So if you could email me, I don't know if that's easier, but
we will put that on the screen. Yes,
that would be fabulous. Pat at mindcircles.co.uk, and I'm happy to really connect with anyone.
Patricia, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing so openly about the most awful thing that could happen in the world to make things better for other people. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, Susan. Okay, thank you.